I just got a comment asking if I can talk about different salamanders found in Canada. Of course I can, and in fact let's make it a special edition of Animal Appreciation, Canadian Salamanders. Starting off with the Allegheny Mountain Dusky Salamander, which occurs mostly in the eastern United States, but does have two populations in Canada, one very small and scattered one in Quebec, and one slightly larger one in Ontario by the Niagara River. Next, we have the blue spotted salamander, one of my favorite Canadian salamanders. Again, it is found in small areas of Quebec and Ontario, and as you may guess, it is pretty toxic due to that bright blue coloring. Now, many nuisance salamanders are toxic, at least to some degree, but this is one of them on the more toxic sides. Then we have one of the largest salamanders in Canada, the coastal giant salamander, which is found largely in the Pacific Northwest of North America and only found in the very southern regions of British Columbia in Canada. Then we have this guy, the Coeur d'Alene salamander. Now, as you may guess, it is most common around Idaho, around Coeur d'Alene, and also in Montana, but it is found in some of the southeasternmost parts of British Columbia. Now, most of Canada doesn't actually have very good environments for salamanders. They need areas that are pretty warm and pretty moist, and a lot of Canada tends to be quite a lot colder and quite a lot drier than most salamanders can handle. That being said, there are over 20 species of salamanders found at least in some areas of the country. Then we have the tiger salamander. Now, Canada actually has both the eastern and the western tiger salamanders, with the eastern being found in areas of Manitoba and Ontario, and the western being found largely in British Columbia around the Kootenay and the Okanagan areas. Next, we have the Ensatina salamander, which is found pretty exclusively on the west coast, all the way from British Columbia down into California. Next, we have the long-toed salamander, which can be, again, found in British Columbia, one of the 6 species found there, and a couple scattered areas in Alberta. This guy, the mud puppy, is the largest species of salamander found in Canada and mostly is around the Great Lakes area of both Canada and the United States, so found largely in Ontario and Quebec. We have possibly my absolute favorite out of all of the salamanders here, the rough-skinned newt, and I've actually talked before about rough-skinned newts on here because they are known for being very toxic. It is the most poisonous amphibian found in British Columbia, and again, you don't want to mess with these guys because they will poison you quite badly. They are found also more northern than many other salamander species, ranging all the way from Alaska down through British Columbia into the western United States. Then we have the spotted salamander, which is found largely on eastern Canada, pretty much from Ontario over even into the maritime provinces. Then we have the rarest salamander in Canada, the spring salamander, and while it is more common in the United States, it's only found in a couple small areas in Quebec and is very rare to see in those areas, so it really is not that common up here. Another one of those eastern salamanders is the two-line salamander, specifically the northern two-line salamander, which is again found quite widely in Ontario and Quebec and even up into New Brunswick. And finally, we have the last of the western salamanders. I'm talking about the wandering salamander, which is interesting because it only has 2 known populations, one of them being in California and the other one being up in British Columbia, with none being found in between those 2 locations. The British Columbian population is found on Vancouver Island, and genetic analysis did show that they are the same species. They're somewhat distantly related, but they're close enough to be the same thing. So, while salamanders might not be the most common thing in Canada, there are still quite a lot of them, enough of them to make a whole video on.